Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is business brought forward by the city staff. The first item is 1A under Public Works, a public hearing and second reading of ordinance number 1-2020. I think we have Harry here to talk about that.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor.
Good
Um,
evening.
Tonight, we do have the public hearing and the second reading for ordinance number 1-2020, an ordinance approving the annexation petition of McLean Fink, lots 66 and 67. This property, again, is surrounded by, or it's an enclave. It has city water and sewer, and it's served by a paved street. The property is zoned residential medium. They plan to build a couple duplexes, meets all the requirements in the UDC. The ordinance 1-2020, accepting the annexation of McLean Fink, 66 and 67. Staff recommends approval with the conditions of the dedication water fees and the sidewalk escrow to be paid prior to the recording of the annexation. So also recommend that we open it up for a public hearing.
Okay, thank you, Harry. At this time, we'll go ahead and open it up for a public hearing and second reading of ordinance number 1-2020. If we have anyone in the audience who would like to make any comments in regards to this ordinance, please feel free to come up to the podium. Okay, seeing that no one is coming up to the podium, I will now close the public hearing and bring it back to Eric. Yeah. Back to council. Okay.
If there's no further discussion, I move that we accept ordinance number 1-2020, the annexation of McLean Fink lots 66 and 77, with the condition that the water dedication fees and sidewalk escrow fee be paid prior to the recording of the annexation documents.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, Holly, you can call a roll.
Councilor Broyle?
Yes.
Councilor Carson?
Yes.
Councilor Grego?
Yes.
Mayor Coleman?
Yes.
Councilor Hensley?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Up next, we have under item 1B, the first reading of ordinance number 4-2020.
That would be me, Mayor, and
Okay.
This is an ordinance that council considered recently in its work session on January 22nd of 2020. It's an ordinance to provide a mechanism whereby property that has been benefited by the construction of public improvements will share in the cost of those improvements through payment of a recovery charge to the city, which will then be distributed to the original developer who made the improvements. We held a stakeholder meeting in December on this, and then council's work session, as I mentioned, on January 22nd. The ordinance provides for really 4 steps if a developer wants to be reimbursed, and that's the developer's decision about whether they want to participate in this or not. If they do, then within 6 months of completing their infrastructure, they file an application to establish what's called a zone of benefit, identifying the properties that the developer believes to be benefited by the infrastructure the developer put in. Then Public Works will review that application and prepare a report and recommendation, including a recommendation on the developer's proposed formula to apportion cost amongst the other properties benefited. There will then be a hearing in front of council with notice and an opportunity for the properties within that zone of benefit to be heard. At that hearing, council will look at the appropriateness of the identification of the properties. In other words, is the zone identified a correct zone, the formula to be used, and the costs that will be included in that recovery. If council approves the application, it will set forth a resolution setting forth the obligation to pay that cost recovery. When properties within the zone of benefit develop, within a particular time frame. And as drafted, the ordinance proposes 30 years, but I'll go through some of your options because I want you to think about these various options. That's one of the points to consider. Again, the draft ordinance proposes that the cost to be recovered remains flat over 5 years and then increases at 2% thereafter, 2% per year to account for inflation. So the issue before council is, do you want to adopt a policy like this? And as set out in the council communication, there's really kind of 6 things to think about. This ordinance, the first is, this ordinance is limited to street, water, sewer, and storm sewer. I think that's the appropriate limitation, but you could try to expand it to include other utilities. One of the things to think about is if oversized parks were required for some reason or beneficial for some reason. Secondly, the ordinance, as I mentioned, proposes 30 years as the outside limitation for when recovery costs would be imposed. You could make that a longer or a shorter period. Third, the ordinance proposes addressing inflation, as I mentioned, by holding the cost flat for 5 years and then increasing it at 2% per year. That both addresses inflation and also provides incentive for quicker development, in the sense that if you do develop within that first 5-year period of infrastructure being put in, then you will do so without an inflator being applied. Fourth, there is a limitation on how much can be recovered for engineering costs in your project, and it limits that to 20%. Fifth, there is a limitation on, there's a trigger not only for undeveloped properties to have to pay this reimbursement, but also for properties that modify an existing building to the tune of increasing the value of that building or development by 35% or more. So question whether 35% is the right number to use. Finally, where should this cost recovery fee go if the city collects it, but say we're in year 30 and we can't find the original developer anymore? Does that go into the general fund? Should it go to an enterprise fund? Should it be waived? So those are the things to think about. As drafted, the ordinance contains the 30-year limit. It contains the 5-year flat and then 2% per year. It contains the 20% engineering limitation. It contains the 35% trigger on increase in value. And it puts any undeliverable recovery fee into the general fund. And it's staff recommendation to approve as drafted, but those are all points that are open for discussion. And again, this is just first reading.
Okay, so can someone bring a mic up here, because I know
This
council.
mic actually is, oh, there it's working.
We need a mic. I have a couple comments from some council members. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that one. Thank you. So if you could, just raise your hand, and then let's just do this to make it easy. Start at the end and come back this way with it, okay?
And Mayor, if you would call out the counselor's name, then the
Okay.
record would reflect that.
Sure, great. All right, Councilor Brawls.
All right, my first question on number 1, do we want to include sidewalks or not?
Yes, we would, and I'm considering sidewalks as part of the street improvement. So street, sidewalk, curb gutter would all be street.
And would we understand that 20 years from today?
Maybe not, so yes.
I'd like to see sidewalks put in there.
Yeah, I will make that change and make sure that that's clear.
And then can you explain the 35% increase again?
So
The
that
market
is-
value can only go up 35%?
Well, so the ordinance is drafted to require subsequent developers to contribute to the infrastructure that they benefit from. And the 35% comes in if you're not a brand new subsequent developer. Say you had a ratty old building that was already there, and you didn't benefit from this zone of benefit, but then you increased the value of your building by 35% or more.
and you, in doing so, took advantage of some of the infrastructure that went in, then you would have to contribute. So the 35% is the trigger for how much increase in value triggers that obligation to contribute to the infrastructure that you benefit from.
So when we had the work session, we focused mostly on vacant lots and how that works. So this was in there, we just really didn't discuss it during the work session.
So it would say what you said, right?
Yes, it says that if you, so if you develop a vacant lot, obviously, you're going to be subject to these recovery costs, and then this portion of it says if you improve a non-vacant lot by 35% or more, you're also subject to it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Counselor Griego?
Okay, on
Thank you,
the,
Counselor Carson.
on the 30 years, and I didn't read clearly through this, what mechanism do we have in there that we're not gonna be here in 30 years, and then somebody comes and wants to take this lot, and so if they go to get a building permit, will that trigger something from Public Works, or how does that work?
Two things. One, we will be tracking that through our new and improved GIS tracking system, which we're starting to implement now. So we have a GIS tracking system whereby information relating to every single lot in the city is tied into maps that show those lots. So you click on that lot and it pulls up all kinds of information with respect to that. It'll be tied in there. But I think more importantly, the resolution itself gets recorded in the county clerk and recorder's records, so that when somebody does a title search, that will show up as an encumbrance on the property. And I talked with Paul Motes at Southwest Title a long time ago about it, and then I talked with him more recently about it again, and he says as long as we have the names of the property owners who are affected in the resolution, that the title companies will pick that up. So we will work closely with the title companies to make sure that the form of resolution that we use is one that they will find, but it will be recorded in the county records.
And then you said that it's up to the developer to even want to get reimbursed, right?
Correct. It's their
And that's all.
choice as to whether they want to go through this process or not.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Griego. Counselor Hensley?
So just a few questions. So one is the 2%, and I apologize, I didn't multiply this out. But if 30 years go by, does that let's say it's at year 25 or 30, is that 2% pretty substantial then?
Well, yeah, it would be at so if it happens at year 30, then you subtract off 5 years. So you got 25 years at 2% without compounding anything, that's 50%.
Okay.
That's generally below the rate of inflation, though.
Okay.
But again, so that's at your work session, you guys discussed whether it should be 1.5 or 2, and it wasn't clear to me that you had an answer. I just threw 2 in.
Counselor
I wasn't quite
Carson.
done.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I had a couple questions. So then the other question I have is on that 5, which is the 35% increase. What if they do some modification to this building on their own and sell it for a higher amount? Like, so it doesn't just increase in value because it's there, but they actually say, hey, I'm gonna actually work on this so I can sell this and make some money off of it. So if it's above 35%, does that make sense what I'm asking?
Well, maybe. Let me see if this answer works. The 35% would get triggered when they pull a building permit for the modification that they want to do. So we would know the modification that they're doing pursuant to that building permit. It's not if it's a 35% increase in value because time has gone by and property values have gone up, that doesn't trigger anything. It's if they pull a building permit and make a modification to increase the value by more than 35%.
So adding a garage, adding on to the house, those types of things.
Yeah, or turning a barn into a convention center.
And then them selling it to somebody else to actually,
You don't have to
Don't
sell
sell
it.
it.
oh, it's just the value.
Just
Okay,
the
now I'm
value.
with you. And then, sorry, one more question if you don't mind.
Sure.
Then the last one is, on 6, when it says that if you cannot find the original developer, well, obviously 30 years is a long time, so if we stick with that, there's a good chance that maybe a developer might pass away. And so if they leave their stuff to whoever, would that person be the next person, or?
Well, that would be up to the developer, yeah. I mean, if they, you know, if a developer is a person rather than a corporation, corporations live forever, but if the developer is a person and dies, then that person either has a will which
Right.
disposes of their property, or
Okay.
or they die intestate, and then the Colorado statutes say what happens to it. This is just a piece of property
Got it.
that would be dealt with.
Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Carson?
Just as a reminder, were we putting the, just the notification in their application that they have the right for reimbursement? How are we notifying the developer? It's just part of their packet, right? When they come in and apply, is that?
Well,
get
it's going to
notified
be in
about-
the ordinances, so presumably the developer is aware of the ordinances. We haven't thought through, I mean.
Okay, it'll just be, I got you.
Yeah, I
mean,
don't
they'll-
know.
They'll know that it's out there.
Well, and if they don't, because 10 years from now or something like that, we haven't thought through if we're putting it in any kind of flyer or anything
Yeah, I
like
wasn't
that.
sure if we had settled on
But
that or
clearly,
not.
when a developer comes in and they're meeting with staff and they're talking about what they're planning to do, and we're going over, you know, you're gonna have to put in this, and during
Yeah,
those
it'll come up.
conversations, it's gonna come up.
I remember that conversation in our meeting now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think we talked about us trying to be as transparent as possible on the front end so that everyone's aware and there are no surprises down the road.
Well, and so I didn't go through some of the other alternatives. Actually, I stopped with those which were modifying this, but you don't have to adopt this ordinance either, and we discussed this in the work session. We used to have a reimbursement ordinance that was simpler. It was like 2 pages instead of 13 pages. And we lost it inadvertently when we adopted the UDC. So that's one of the reasons we're in front of you. But it had the disadvantage of not being transparent on the front end. So it was like 30 years later, we tell some poor schmuck that, you know, they owe something that they had no say in. And the beauty of this, I think, is that it gives anybody who's going to be affected the right to be present at the outset.
Mhm.
Well, and you're right, they will be reading the ordinance
Yeah.
thoroughly before they do.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so very much. All righty. Okay, so that's the first reading.
Well,
Let me see.
want a motion?
1 second. Yep. Let me get to where I could see it. Okay, Councilor Griego.
If there's no further questions, I'll make a motion. We pass on first reading ordinance number 4, 2020, and set it for a public hearing on February what?
19th.
19th at 7 o'clock or soon thereafter.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Thank you, Council. Please.
Counselor Broyles?
Yes.
Counselor Carson?
Yes.
Counselor Griego?
Yes.
Mayor Coleman?
Yes.
Counselor Hensley? Yes. The motion carried unanimously.
Up next on the agenda, under Finance, we have a public hearing and second reading for ordinance number 2-2020. An ordinance revising section 18-46 through 18-48 and section 18-86 of the sales and use tax ordinance of the city of Alamosa. Is that you again? Eric?
Sorry, we're having microphone problems here. Mayor, this is, again, this is second reading, so we went through this on first reading, but as you know, the voters approved the half-cent street fund sales tax, and that needs to be incorporated into our ordinances which address sales tax. When doing that, it became apparent that we had some other voter-approved taxes that had not made it into being incorporated into our code of ordinances, and so this ordinance takes care of incorporating both the recently passed streets sales tax and the earlier voter-approved extensions for the water treatment plant, and then also cleans up some confusing language that the code had with respect to how to calculate the tax, which was archaic and not used by anybody who's on a modern point of sale system, which I think probably 100% of our vendors are. So it's pretty much a cleanup ordinance.
Okay. So did you need to say anything right now? Okay. So at this time, I will open up a public hearing and the second reading of ordinance number 2-2020. If we have anyone in the audience who would like to make any comments, please feel free to come up to the podium. Seeing that no one's coming to the podium, I will now close the public hearing for ordinance number ordinance number 2-2020 and bring it back to council. Councilor Carson?
Unless there's any questions, I would move that we approve ordinance 2-2020 on second reading.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, try, we can see if we could do it again.
Counselor Broyles?
Yes.
Counselor Carson?
Yes.
Counselor Griego?
Yes.
Mayor Coleman?
Yes,
Counselor Hensley?
Yes.
The
Okay.
motion carried unanimously.
thank you. Up next, under finance, we have resolution number 4-2020, amending ordinance 24-2019 for the 2020 budget, also known as the second budget amendment.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilman, Councilwoman.
Mhm.
I have before you the second budget amendment for the 2020 budget, and I was looking it over today, and I'm saying, that's a lot more than we had last year in February, but at the end of the year, if you recall, we had the street tax, we had that refinancing, that we did the bond refinancing, COP, and we had the golf course changes. So a lot of these amendments have to do with those things. I know we did a small one right at the end of the year just so we could go forward with the payroll and such for the golf course, but this kind of cleans up the rest of those. So I'm just going to go down the council communication, if that's all right. If you have questions, you can stop me and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. The government miscellaneous is sort of along the lines of what Eric was talking about on that infrastructure recovery. This was something that happened back in '85 or something, and when they built the Craft intersection, part of the property owners were supposed to repay the city as part of that reconstruction, and so and I don't know how he came across it, but he did. And so now they'll be paying us back $25,000 a year for the next this for 19, and then 20 and 21 will also get a payment. The state grants is that Montana Azul, the DOLA grant that we rolled forward from 2019, because not the Montana Azul, but the Washington Engineering. The total cost of the project came in at being estimated considerably less than originally with the grant was that we asked for, so we reduced that, but then we did roll it forward. The Water Smarts carryover is the revenue that was left from the Water Smarts projects that we did last year, and so we carried it over, and you'll see we need just a little dash more to finish. The Artscape carryover is the money, the revenue and expenses that were unencumbered at the end of 2019, so we carry those forward to use in 2020 for the art program. Part-time salaries, Holly had an intern helping her with some of the records management, and he didn't start until late in the year, so she was still wanted to have him finish the project, so he's working part of the year this year, so that's his salary. And we did, if you recall, looked at buying some property near the head gate, but for the independent ditch on the south side, and that took a little longer than we anticipated, so that'll be completed now in 2020. That transfer out is part of the refinancing project. The debt service for the golf course was originally in the community rec fund, but it was determined that it wouldn't, it would be, we moved the golf course mechanic back to community rec, and the general fund took on the balance of the debt payment, so it's just a swap from one fund to the other. And the additional is the bond, is the debt that City Council agreed to take on when we agreed to the transition to management of the golf course. The levy certification, that's been rolled forward from 17 to 18 to 19 and now to 20, and hopefully we'll get that work done at sometime this year. Economic development, the chamber dues were a little higher than we anticipated, so for Kathy's budget, we increased it $750. The vehicle replacement is for the dump truck, sander bodies, and the snowplow, which we did get in 19, so that's been paid for. The transfer out is due to the street tax fund. The transfer out is the $500 that was agreed to, $500,000 that was agreed to from the general fund to the streets trust fund. And then we did have $150,000 left from 2019 budget for slurry that was not completed in 19. So we rolled that forward over to the streets fund project. And then I have reduced the spending in the streets department CIP by $698,000. Those are the items that would have been paid out of the street tax monies.
They were in the general fund and now are going to be in the street fund.
The $227,500 Washington edition is the total. We paid for part of the engineering in 19, and that's the balance that we believe that will be due for that engineering for the Washington edition project. And then the $30,000 for Reynolds Engineering is for the engineering for First Street. And that was also budgeted in 19, but he didn't complete it, so he'll finish now in 20, and we'll pay him then. The fleet personnel is that golf course mechanic that I mentioned earlier. We moved his position to Parks or to Community Rec. The operating machines and equipment, last year someone broke into the shed and stole the parks maintenance vehicle. And so council did approve last year to purchase a new one. Almost $6,000 will be paid from an insurance recovery and then the rest from fund balance. The landscaping and beautification, that's the $67.47 that we carried forward from last year, and then an additional $13,253 to complete the landscape and water smarts project at Olympian Park. The $16,016 is for the art program. That will be the expense that offsets the revenue up above. In the enterprise fund, there is the funds have built up in that enterprise debt service fund, and so in order to complete some of the water projects and to help to cover the cost to the enterprise funds for the additional street projects, we decided we could transfer another $200,000 from that debt service fund, and so we'll transfer that into the water department. Well, it goes into enterprise fund, but it'll be used in the water department. Bond principal and interest, those are all in conjunction with the debt refinancing. The water system improvements, that's part of the water system improvement and the sewer system improvement for $78,000 and $156,000 respectively are in conjunction with the street trust fund. Additional street paving requires additional infrastructure building, so that's what those two items are. The lift station and craft is part of the augmentation funds. We hope to get that done by April. We have a 65% having spent those augmentation funds by April, so we're trying to, that was included in the approved projects for those funds. The garbage truck we ordered in 19, it should be here I think next month or maybe in April. So those funds were just rolled forward. The building improvements at the wastewater treatment plant, we brought forward $50,000 from 2019, or $100,000 from 2019 and $50,000 for fund balance because the roof is, the last estimate was considerably higher than the original estimate that we got. The street trust fund, that's the street trust fund. So the estimated sales tax collection were based on what we collected in 2019. The transfer in is coming from the general fund, and then The street improvements are what's hopefully will be able to complete in 2020. Golf course building is that debt that we moved to the general fund from Conservation Trust. And then the ACLC debt service is an amount that we paid in 2019 in order to complete the refinancing of the COPs. The community rec revenue, Friends of the Library gave the library, and they usually donate $5,000, and this year they donated $7,500. So we budgeted for the 5, but we put the extra $2,500 in the budget. The city was able to obtain a grant from El Primar to go towards the Montana Azul for $25,000, which was a bonus because we didn't really count on that one. Grant revenue remaining from GOCO, and they agreed to let us roll that over, $347,794 for Montana Azul. The community rec, Andy was able to work with the marketing board, and they agreed that they would put in $50,000 and we could put in $50,000 and get that mobile stage, which we had budgeted in 2023, and with them partnering with us, we were able to save about $25,000. So council had approved that, but we just moved it from 2023 to 2020. The grant revenue, $93,600, that we received that from the Colorado Health Foundation actually in 2018. It's been in deferred revenue because we couldn't spend it. It's for Montana Azul, so we should be able to use it now this year for the park. And in the expenses, that's the $2,500 that goes with the extra money that Soleil will get from the Friends of the Library. The $100,000, that's for the mobile stage that I mentioned earlier that we're partnering with the marketing district for. The golf course personnel, that's the mechanic. The golf course lease is what we moved up to the general fund. And the $623,184 is the remaining budget for Montana Azul. The original budget was $712,000, but we did pay some of the engineering and some other, or not engineering, but some equipment expenses we ordered, and we paid for the first half down. So we spent that in 2019.
What's the total cost of that stage?
I think it's $100,000.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, we'll pay for it all, and then the marketing board will reimburse us the $50,000. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, we originally had that budgeted for $75,000 in 2023, but then Cale offered to help us out, I think, with the marketing board, and he worked with them, and they agreed to partner with us on that purchase because they use it for a lot of different events. And then the very last one is the transfer out. It's the transfer from the Enterprise Debt Services Fund over to the Enterprise Fund.
Okay, thank you
Does
so very
anyone
much.
have any questions?
No questions. If there's no questions, I'll make the motion that we pass resolution number 4, 2020.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Thank you, council. I think we could start voting this time. Let's try it, see if it works. Okay, I think. All righty. Jackpot.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Ms. Holly?
The motion carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Up next, we have resolution number 5-2020, a resolution adopting the city's 2020 capital improvement plan.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome.
Can you?
We could barely hear
Okay.
you, but go ahead. There
So
you go.
similar to the budget amendment, a lot of what the new CIP is, we're carrying some of those 2019 projects forward to 2020. We also, because of the sales tax being successful, we needed to update the streets CIP to align with what that is. So really everything had been approved other than the items I had identified in the council communication. And so In the enterprise, the craft lift station, as Judy kind of explained, we need to get that done in order to meet the requirements for that financing. So that was moved up, and then we did add 40,000 because of more recent quotes that we are getting. From a fleet perspective, we had a loader with multi-tool. We reduced it from 170,000 down to 105 because when we purchase it from that vendor, we will do a trade-in with that vendor, and so we will only be expending 105,000. With that savings, and it doesn't take all of it, we wanted to put back in the pothole machine. You might remember in a work session, as Farron described, getting slung up against a vehicle because we don't have the right equipment. So that's about 20,000, no, 50,000 to purchase that. So it doesn't take the entire difference, but we wanted to try to get that in there from a safety perspective. We did look at increasing the streets dump truck in 2021 by 40,000 because of the hook assembly. At the same time, we reduced the snow plows from 20,000 down to 9. The sander bodies were reduced from 35 down to 16. And then finally, working with the golf and how we're absorbing that in the lease that we're looking at for their equipment, we were able to remove the purchase of mowers that was no longer needed in the CIP. So I can open the CIP if you want, but those were the only things beyond moving the 2019 and the street sales tax that Judy covered pretty well in depth. It lines up.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Okay, council. All right, Councilor Carson.
I don't have any questions. If anyone else doesn't, I would recommend that we adopt the 2020 CIP.
Okay.
Sorry, the resolution, we adopt resolution 5-2020, adopting the city's 2020 capital improvement plan.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, if not, please start voting. Ms. Holly?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Up next, under City Manager Legal, the first reading of ordinance number 3-2020, an ordinance amending section 11-51 of Code of Ordinances of the City of Alamosa. Eric?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is an ordinance that is being brought to you for your consideration on first reading to cover kind of two holes in our existing ordinance and the way they overlap with state statute. In terms of providing marijuana to minors, the state statute prohibits providing marijuana to minors, but only if the person providing the marijuana is at least 2 years older than the minor. So if the person providing it is not at least 2 years older than the minor, then it's not prohibited by state statute. So we wanted to be able to address that hole by doing a local ordinance about it. And then also sometimes, in fact frequently, the amount of marijuana under consideration is of a level that at the officer's discretion, it may be more appropriate to charge that into municipal court than into state court. And so by having an ordinance on the books that prohibits providing marijuana to minors, that enables the officer to exercise discretion to choose whether to file it into municipal court or into state court. It is very similar and in fact is in a neighboring section to our existing ordinance which prohibits providing alcohol to minors. So it just essentially we're adding marijuana to the alcohol provision.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Okay, Councilor Griego.
Well, this is a first reading, so I'll go ahead and we motion to approve on first reading ordinance number 3-2020 and set it for a public hearing on February the 19th at 7 o'clock or soon thereafter.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, if not, please start voting. Ms. Harley?
The motion carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Up next, we have committee reports. Thank you. Councilor Hensley?
So I need to pull up my notes, so just give me one sec here. I'm the alternate for the library board, and I was honored to be able to serve as the alternate and go to the last meeting. And I have to tell you, I am so impressed with the library board. They, their report, the energy they have, the different events, the different things they do month to month to encourage people to go to the library is so impressive. And then even the report that they print up or they send to us, and the pictures and just all of the things that they do. I was super impressed and felt very honored actually to be part of that for that meeting. And so just a couple of things, there is so much that I could say that they do. And one of the things that's really exciting is they're doing a great job of getting it out into the newspapers, a lot of the different things that are happening. So that's really great. They, at this point, have 13 of the little free libraries that are around town where they're the little boxes. And what happens is you have stewards that actually sponsor those little libraries, and they commit to maintaining them. And the library supplies the books, but they make sure those books get in there and that type of thing. And this spring, there's going to be 3 more that are installed. And so there's actually plans, it hasn't been firmed up yet, but that idea of having somewhat of an event. Something with the idea of going from box to box and just celebrating that we have that. So I think that's really exciting. So I thought that was neat. Another great fact that I thought was pretty impressive is that with the community has saved $1.5 million by borrowing items from the library instead of purchasing them. I thought that was an incredible fact, and hoping it might make the newspaper. But that idea, because I just thought that was really cool, that again, the community saved $1.5 million by borrowing items from the library instead of purchasing those items. That's a great savings to our community, and I think it really shows what our library does. And they continually come up with creative ideas, and that idea that reading is still very important, but also, obviously, technology is there, and so how do we continue to bring people in the library? And they're just doing a fantastic job. So I wanted to celebrate that.
All right, well, thank you. That's something to celebrate. Appreciate it, Councilor
I
Hensley.
just had a question for her, Mayor. They used to have this clicker, I guess, to see how many people go in and out of the library. Because every time you come by here, or we come there, that thing is full, especially the computers and stuff. So do they talk about that with the use and all that and
So
the numbers?
Yes, and so there actually is quite a bit of data on that. And overall, I guess what I'll say is things are continuing to improve and do well. And so they do have all the statistics here. And so I could forward that to everybody so they see all those numbers. Because again, they have graphs, they show month to month. It's pretty impressive.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, thank you, Councilor Hensley. Councilor Broles. Oh, and then Councilor Carson. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna report on the senior citizens, attended their meeting, and they're doing some good things. First of all, they wanna build a 24 by 24 building so that they can have an exercise room. They think they can build that for $39,000. And what they did is they did sell the Marsh home, so they have cash to do that. Next thing is, they're having a dinner on February 15th, I believe at 6 o'clock. It's $50 a plate, but you get prime rib, and they hold this annually, and I think it's a good event.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And then they are sponsoring an art show at the San Luis Valley Health Care Center on the 2nd floor from February 3rd to April 10th. They're featuring 15 artists.
Wow.
So the general public can go and buy art if they want to. So I thought that's pretty good. The senior citizens are doing pretty well, so I enjoy going to those board meetings.
Thank you, Councilor Broles. Councilor Carson.
Just wanted to report on the COG. Went to the COG meeting this last week, and Kevin we basically discussed the new batch of mini grants that are gonna be going out for the surrounding communities, which are pretty good, you know, how the ones from last year went. The other primary or second focus of the meeting was, he introduced 2 new vistas that they have. They're gonna be working, one of them's gonna be working, trying to figure out some of the commute issues and transportation issues in the valley. We had a lengthy discussion of that. I've always kind of, I guess I've never really understood the difficulties of creating a commuting system in the valley. It seemed like it was around when I was younger, and it's kind of gone away to an extent. But that Vista will be focusing on that, and then they've got one that's going to be focusing on some of the housing shortages and issues. So those are pretty good things that they're doing there. Just wanted to update on that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Carson. Thank you to all of you. Okay, so next we have staff announcements, City Council evaluation process.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, this is, I think, since I've been here, the first time we actually did an attachment under staff announcements. So
Yeah.
it's a little different. When Holly and Eric and I met, though, we thought that, one, it was important just to have it in writing so it's easily accessible. But then also in 5 years, if someone wanted to search up why did we pick these dates or, you know, those types of things, it's all written out on what this process is. In short, when we held the full retreat, what we talked about is modifying how council does the evaluation process for direct reports. And the changes included hiring a facilitator. That way it would be someone who takes on the work of compiling all that information, making sure it's moving along. It enables all councils to participate in the discussion instead of one of them having to lead it or, you know, those types of things. It also helps that should there be any deviation of what should happen in evaluation, that facilitator can help kind of with that as well. And then the other was we wanted to try to see if we can get the number of meetings down, and to do that, we decided that we wanted the evaluations to be done by before November, when a new council might come on. So that way you're not recently elected and trying to evaluate staff. So with that deadline of November 1st, we essentially backtracked, and we've been able to get the actual meetings down to 3. Now they are on off Wednesdays, but I think instead of having a regular meeting that goes to 10 and then you have to stay and do an evaluation after it, that can be hard. So they are 3 off Wednesdays, but it's from, I think, 12 meetings down to 3 to get this entire process done. So when you backtrack, it actually has us starting July 22nd, when the facilitator would send out the 360 evaluation. We haven't created those yet. We're still talking about it. They would send the 360 evaluation out. 1 week later, they would receive those back and they would compile it. So this all goes to the facilitator. We wouldn't see them from a staff perspective who are being evaluated. 1 week later, council will receive what we're calling the evaluation packet. The facilitator would send the compiled 360 information. Your direct reports would send a short bulleted summary, similar to kind of what you guys get right now. And then also you'll receive a blank evaluation form, not to fill out, but just as a background, so when you're reading the information, you kind of know what you're looking for future discussion. Then 1 week later, council would hold a special meeting and go into executive session. So this year, that would be August 12th. Each direct report would have 15 minutes to come in, review that summary, answer any questions, do anything like that. And then the second part of the meeting, which would be probably the longer part, would be the facilitated discussion. And so we as staff would not be there, and this is where the facilitator would lead you through each of the 4 direct reports of kind of what that evaluation needs to look like. 2 weeks later, after the facilitator's taken that and put it into the form, the facilitator would send you what we're calling the draft evaluations. For you to be able to review and comment on, and we gave you guys about 2 weeks for that. We felt that should be about an appropriate amount of time. So you'd have 2 weeks to review it and send back to the facilitator any of your final comments, and then 1 week later, the facilitator would send the final evaluation to City Council and direct reports. and we'd have about a week to read and digest that, and then we would have 2 different meetings, because we felt putting us all on one night would be probably a little too much. So 2 would go on one night and 2 would go on the next night. And so we would just split it, and so one direct report would go first and meet with council and the facilitator, receive their evaluation, and then the second half of that meeting would be the other direct report, and then the second meeting would be essentially the same way.
Okay.
Is there any questions? I do have a few more staff updates, but and then we also identified who we think by position who should get the 360 evaluation, which is in there as well. And it's all direct reports or people who work directly with that position.
Sounds good. I'm just assuming this is just information. We don't need to make a motion.
Nope, you don't need to vote or anything like that. We
Okay.
just, I wanted to make sure we're getting all of this on the calendars. We needed to make sure Kim was available for this, and she is, but we needed to start getting those dates. And
Yeah.
so even though it ends in the end, it looks like October 14th, we're starting in July. So we
Okay.
needed to make sure we were not dragging our feet on this.
Okay, I believe Councilor Brawls have a question. No question. Okay. All right, thank you. You can continue.
The the feel-good staff announcement I have is I just wanted to thank all of staff that had anything to do with Ice Fest. I mean, it was amazing, and I don't know if the public ever realizes how much behind-the-scenes work goes on, and I know Jess could entertain you guys with some stories related to having to get out with snowshoes to make the trail, or a carcass on the trail and covering it with snow, and because it's frozen into the water. So it was a lot of interesting stuff, but it's amazing. All staff that participated, a majority of it was on Parks and Recreation, but obviously some other staff touch it, but fire and public information and those types of things, and police. But it was amazing. I think we were really fortunate with the weather. I know from a downtown perspective, there was a lot of people downtown. And I spoke to one business owner who felt that he had met his sales point around 2:30 that day.
Wow.
So I think that says a lot for having activities in the time of year when it is their slow season, and the weather cooperating can really make a big difference. So I just want to do a shout out for everyone on that. The next one is a little bit of maybe a discussion item, unless you guys are as tired as I am. Eric and Holly and I were talking, and it was 2 weeks ago as I was thinking through, I felt like we were dropping some balls, or maybe there's stuff we were supposed to be working on that we weren't. And it hit me that we may have just finished our election, but we had planned on doing another election this year, which was to ask residents if they needed to get a certain amount of percentage signatures in each ward, and that they couldn't force a special election with a petition, that it would just be the next regular election, which was just, we just finished this. So what I talked to with Eric and Holly is, do we still think this is the best timing, or do we think it's worth waiting a year? We still think it needs to happen. There's no doubt about that. But the reason we're wondering if we would want to wait is, one, this is an election year that normally we don't have anything. So we're going from not paying anything to paying to take this before the voters. And then the other is, since it is an election that's probably going to be fairly contentious and high turnout, it will require more education than if it was just a normal election on municipal issues. And so there's just more work there. And so the question to council isn't, we still think it needs to happen, we still think it's important, but at the same time, we're not sure this year's the right year. We would maybe say 2021 is the year, and so we just wanted to get some feedback from you.
Councilor Griego, I'll let each one of you talk. Then
Is-
Councilor Carson next.
Is this a vote you need to postpone it for, or just a consensus saying?
Just some
Yeah.
and then when I meet with the 2 counselors who aren't here, I'll share with them and see if they have any feedback.
I agree. I'd rather postpone it for till next election.
I agree.
I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. Is there
Yeah.
anyone not comfortable with that?
Because it costs us $10,000 to put something on the ballot at least, right? Minimum?
Yes. The city
Yeah,
clerk
and the
is shaking her
educational
head.
piece, I think it'd be more feasible for the city to just wait till next year when we're gonna do it anyway.
What I'm worried about is with this type of election, you will have more people voting who aren't normally as engaged, and so reaching them from an educational perspective is
Be tough.
harder.
Yes,
So,
okay.
and as far as I know, I think that's it from a staff update. I don't see anyone raising their hands back there.
Okay, Councilor Grego has a question.
I had a question for you, City Manager or Public Works. I know Main Street is a highway. Is there any way that, when the cars are gone, that we can run a grader on the east side of the street to kind of clean it up a little bit, because it looks really bad, and I know that there's some frozen stuff there, and just to clean it up down on Main Street. And I don't know how hard that would be, and if we're even allowed to do it, because it's a highway.
Well, I'll let Harry come up and answer that, but my initial thought, and he can
Just
correct
to-
me,
Just to clean it up, because, you drive downtown and that ice is all plugged up there, and then all that dirt and.
I think we have to be careful if the ice is adhered to the street on how you can
Okay.
get it up, but I'll let Harry answer in case I'm wrong.
Yeah, certainly when we have freeze thaw and we end up with ice, even a grader won't break it loose. So unfortunately, with that snowstorm, it happened kind of during the middle of the day, and then we had it was during the holidays actually when we got most of that snow, so we're short-staffed. But typically, we try to get Main Street, the CDOT right-of-ways cleaned up within 24 hours. So we'll keep an eye on it as it starts to warm up. We get a little bit of thawing. We'll certainly work on it, try to make sure the storm lines are opened up, and try to get it drained out.
Thank you. Okay, is that all staff announcements you have?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. We'll bring it now to council comments. Councilor Carson?
I guess, I want to apologize first for not showing up at the polar plunge. I had stitches in my hand. I wasn't allowed to jump in.
Oh, no,
Pond
worries.
waters.
no. He paid his due last year, so we're good.
But, and thank you to staff for Ice Fest. I heard great things. I heard it was awesome, and so I appreciate that. We all do. But I want to thank council and city staff, but I want to thank you guys for good governance and being good examples and good stewards of our city and stewards of our city's money and finances, especially on days like today when we see the examples up above us of terrible spending, terrible decisions, and terrible governance. So I just want to thank you guys for being good stewards of our city, and again, I'm happy to be part of this team. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Councilor Carson. We're glad you're part of the team as well. Thank you. Councilor Grego?
I had a couple, Mayor. The San Luis Valley Water Conservancy Board that I sit on is hosting their annual Waters Leaders course. It's called the Rio Grande Waters Course. Myself and Heather, we've attended that. It's a course that it's going to happen March 23rd through 27th from 6 to 9 p.m. each day. And this is like a 101 course on water for people who want to just understand a little bit of what the whole water situation is all about. They've got 25 seats available. And like I said, if anybody is interested, I emailed it out to everybody, but I didn't know we were supposed to do that. We're not supposed to do that, but I just thought I'd bring it out. And the applications are due by February the 28th, and it's a $30 course, and they have a dinner for it and stuff. But for people that, we're talking about water all the time. This course is, there's a lot of great speakers. In fact, we're hosting it over at your building.
I host it.
Or you host it? Oh, good.
Yeah, you can download the app on our website, Rio Grande Water's website too, but you're right, it is a great course.
Yeah, good. Also, I want to thank Heather for sending the newsletter from San Luis. What a great, boy, we had CML down there, and it was just such an incredible dinner that they did out there. But you got a bunch of young people that have come together, and they're taking their community, and they're moving their community, and it's just so, you know, you see that in San Luis, you see it in La Jara, and even Montevista, where all these communities are taking their communities and moving forward. And you see that going, and then I don't know who in the heck it is that wants to write that how nasty, how bad the San Luis Valley is, and, you know, they need to come down here and see what's really going on and visit these communities, because, you know, to put stats that we're the most dangerous or whatever in the state or whatever is totally wrong. You go to these communities and you talk to these people, God, especially San Luis, I'm just so amazed by what they've done and what they're doing. You know, that downtown vision and mission, that's incredible. So when you said that and I read that whole thing, that is incredible what our valley's doing, and even ourselves as we move forward here in Alamosa. So
I agree.
thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Grego. Councilor Carson?
I just wanted to back up Councilor Griego on what he said on the water leaders course. If anybody hasn't taken it, and you can get an application and get in, it's very good education. You'll get to listen to some of the premier people on water in the history of our valley. They're awesome. Some of the attorneys that speak are just incredible to listen to. And keep in mind that education's important, especially when you have entities like this trying to put out undermining articles, you know, kind of almost character assassination of the valley. And then you have other entities coming in trying to remove resources that we have here that are already pretty scarce. So I think it's important to be part of that, and if you can take that class, I would suggest you do. So thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And I would like to thank the entire city staff for the Ice Fest festivities and your support and being there. And I saw so many people who really enjoyed every aspect of it, and I believe it's going to continue to grow if we keep doing the things that we're doing. And the sculptures this year were so cool. The wave runner you could sit on. You know, I really sat on it. My pants got wet and stuff. I didn't think, but that was really cool. And then the hang loose where you could put your face through the little hole. That was really cool. And all of the events, the entire team did a wonderful job. And thank you to all of the first responders for being there to get me out of the water. I appreciate that as well. And the county donated their mobile unit as a warming hut, and it was very well welcomed by everyone. So thank you, everyone. Okay. All right. If that's if there is no other questions, this meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you.